Ken Haset Salom, my kindred people, welcome to your daily flip, where daily flip of Yah's script will always right our ship. This is part 2 to our discussion on beware of the leaven. Last episode, we talked about when Yeshua warned his disciples to beware of the leaven of the scribes and the Pharisees, of the Herodians, that he was referring to the influence of religious tradition. And we also talked about how the scribes and the Pharisees, even from way back under the old covenant, they were opposed to Yeshua HaMashiach. They were opposed to the righteous one coming, to the Messiah coming to establish and to bring us back into right relationship with Yahuwah by reconnecting us, by reconciling us to the kingdom and dominion of what Adam lost in the garden. So we're going to continue to discuss. Last episode, we talked about how the scribes and the Pharisees, along with King Herod, how they tried to, from jump, when they heard about the coming of Yeshua HaMashiach as the King of the Jews, being born as the King of the Jews, that they tried to kill him. Even as a child, they actually slaughtered hundreds of children under the age of 2 years old just to secure their rule and their reign in Jerusalem. And we talked about how that was the catalyst that really put up an offense and a barrier between Yeshua, his disciples, and the scribes and the Pharisees, the Judaizers, as they were called in that particular time and day. So we're going to continue our discussion on that. We got a few more passages that we want to flip to and just really just lay this foundation to show you that Yeshua never came to start a religion, but he came to bring us back into right relationship with the kingdom of heaven. Because from jump, that's all he preached about. From jump, he said, when he started his ministry, he said, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. He never preached a religion. He never talked about starting a religion. Matter of fact, the ones that he had friction with was the religious crowd, was the scribes, the Pharisees, the chief priests, the elders, and all of these different people who was all about tradition and religion. One of the questions that we brought up on the last episode is, how did we go from the friction between Yeshua and the Jews till now, in our time and our day, we are encouraged as quote unquote Christians to support and to fight on behalf and to ally and link up with Israel, with the Jews, when in Yeshua's day, it wasn't like that. You know, right now, as I speak, you know, Iran and Israel are firing missiles back and forth, and they have started this war. And that is significant. That means something. Some things are happening and going on, but there's a reason for that. And this is why we have to do research on ancient Christianity and do research on the relationship between Christianity and the kingdom of heaven, because that is going to help us to understand what's going on right now here today. It's going to help us to break that down and to understand what's going on. So let's get right back into it. Let's go to Matthew chapter 23, because we're talking about the friction that Yeshua had with the scribes and the Pharisees. We talked about last episode how they tried to kill him as a child. how they actually succeeded in doing that 33 years later when he was crucified by the hands of the Roman Empire. But all of that was started and put in motion from the Jews. I mentioned the trilateral sabotage, and that's something that we're going to get into a little later on. But that is really three different groups that came together in order to sabotage the Christian faith. And we're going to talk about that. We're leading up to that. We're going to get into that. But we have to take this thing step by step so that we can have a full understanding of what's being said. But let's look here in Matthew chapter 23. We're going to start reading, let's just start reading at verse 1, and then we're going to kind of work our way on down. But look here at what Yeshua was saying when he was talking about and addressing the crowd. Then Yeshua said to the crowd and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do. For they preach, but do not practice." In other words, they were saying a lot of good stuff, but they wasn't putting feet to their faith. They wasn't practicing what they was preaching. Look at verse 4. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. They do all of their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They love the place of honor at the feast and the best seats in the synagogue and greetings in the marketplace and being called rabbi by others. Verse 8, but you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And call no man your father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven. Neither be called instructor, for you have one instructor, and that is Hamashiach. So here he was breaking it down. He was warning them about the influence of the scribes and the Pharisees. Let's continue reading. Verse 11. The greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humble, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Now look at verse 13. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's face. For you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel across the sea and land to make a single proselyte. And when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. This is what Yeshua said about the scribes and the Pharisees. He said that they were hypocrites, children of hell. Now, how do we get from him calling them that to today we say, oh, Israel is God's people? Something had to take place for us to go from that to where we at today. And we're going to break this thing down and look at it. But in order for us to do that, y'all know what we have to do. We have to continue to flip these pages. So we talked about why Yeshua and his disciples had beef with the scribes and the Pharisees. But have you ever wondered, why did they have beef with Yeshua? Because you think about it, here's a man, he's doing all these miraculous signs, healing people of leprosy and blindness and raising people from the dead and all of this wonderful stuff. But yet and still, the scribes and the Pharisees, they had a problem with him. And it goes all the way back to why they even tried to kill him as a child. Because when the wise men came, they said that they was looking for the one born King of the Jews. And Herod, at the time, he was referred to as the King of the Jews. But he knew that he wasn't born King of the Jews. He knew that he wasn't a true Hebrew. He wasn't from the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But he had been installed along with the scribes and the Pharisees. They were all installed by the Roman Empire there in Jerusalem. And they knew that if one came up who was truly born King of the Jews, that that would be a threat to their rule. So let's flip to John. We're going to John chapter 11. We're going to start reading at verse 45. But I want you in your spare time to read this whole chapter, because this is shortly after Yahusha had raised Lazarus from the dead. I want y'all to read. This is when Martha and Mary, they sent word to Yahusha to come, and because their brother Lazarus was sick and he was dying. And it said that Yahusha waited about 3 or 4 days before he even left and went to where they were. And by the time he got there, Lazarus was dead and gone. I mean, they had the funeral, the repast, everything. Lazarus was in the grave. He was in the tomb. But Yahusha told them, look, I am the resurrection and the life. If you would simply believe in me, you will see a move of God. And surely they took him to the grave. He told them to roll back the stone, and he raised Lazarus from the dead. And this is picking up shortly after that had happened. So this is where we at here in John chapter 11, verse 45. And it says this: many of the Jews, therefore, who had came with Mary and saw what he had did, they saw what Yahusha did, they believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Yahusha had done. Verse 47. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, what are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. You see, this is why they had a problem with him. This is why they tried to kill him as a child. This is why they finally succeeded 33 years later, and they killed him, because they knew that if he continued in his ministry, if he continued preaching repentance and preaching the kingdom of heaven, if he continued to operate and to do the miraculous signs and wonders that he was doing, they knew that that would be a threat to their rule and their reign. Just like they said here in verse 48, that the Romans would come. The people that had installed them, the people that had installed Herod as the king of the Jews, they would come and they would take away their rule and their reign. So they felt threatened by Yahusha. And this is why they sought to kill him. But let's continue to read. Verse 49. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish. So in other words, he was saying, we ain't gonna let him, this one man, destroy the whole nation. It's better for us to kill him than for him to destroy our rule and our reign. This is what Caiaphas was saying. Look at verse 51. He did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. And not for the nation alone, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. So from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. Now, let's continue to flip. Let's go over to Mark. Let's go to Mark chapter 14. So I'm just laying a foundation. I'm just showing you how the Jews, how they plotted against Yeshua. We talked about what they did when he was a child. Now we're seeing what took place 33 years later. Here in Mark 14, we're going to start reading at verse 1. It says this: It was now 2 days before the Passover and the feast of unleavened bread. And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. For they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar of the people. Now, let's drop down to verse 10. Verse 10 says this: Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12. So this is Judas, one that was inside the camp, one of his own disciples, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. Verse 11, and when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. And he sought an opportunity to betray him. So this is how they finally got that opportunity. Got their opportunity. It was by someone on the inside. It was because of one of his own disciples, Judas Iscariot, betrayed him. In other words, he snitched Yeshua out. He turned them in. He told them, look, I'll give him up. I'll set him up. And they promised to give him money. Now, let's continue to read. Let's go to verse 32. Look what it says here. And they went to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. And he took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch. And going a little further, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour may pass from him. Verse 36, and he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. And he came and found them sleeping and said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Now let's drop down to verse 43. Look what it says here. And immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. And the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, the one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard. Verse 45, and when he came, he went up to him at once and said, Rabbi, and kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him. So this is how they finally got their opportunity to seize Yeshua. It was by the betrayal of one that was part of the 12. It was by one that was a part of the inner circle. It was by one that was a part of the faith. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. It was the Jews, and it was one that was a part of the faith who later betrayed him. Now, let's continue to read. Let's go to chapter 15. Chapter 15, verse 1 says this. And as soon as it was morning, the chief priests had a consultation with the elders and the scribes and the whole council. And they bound Yeshua and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. So it was the Jews, it was the snitch, and they took him to the Romans. They took him to Pilate. Three groups, or three people: the Jews, the snitch, and the Romans. That is the trilateral sabotage right there. Let's continue to read. Verse 2. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." And the chief priests accused him of many things. And Pilate asked him, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further answer. So Pilate was amazed. And notice here what the charge was. The charge wasn't that he was starting a new religion. The charge wasn't that he was starting a new tradition. No, the charge was, "Are you the king of the Jews?" The same thing that they tried to kill him for as a child. The same thing was the fact that he was accused of being the king of the Jews. Because this is what Yeshua came to establish. He didn't come to start a new religion. He didn't come to start a new tradition. No, he came to establish the kingdom of heaven. He came to reconcile us back to the kingdom of heaven. And this was a threat to the Jews. This is why they sought to kill him. This is why they handed him over to the Romans. This is why Judas snitched him out to the Pharisees, who handed him over to the Romans. Now, let's drop down to verse 8. It says this: And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have them release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to them, "Then what do you want me to do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas. And having scorned Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Now, let's drop down to verse 16. And the soldiers led him away inside the palace, that is the governor's headquarters. And they called together the whole battalion. Verse 17. And they clothed him in a purple cloak, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. And they began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they were striking his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling down in homage to him. Verse 20. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him. And they led him out to crucify him. And we all know the story of the crucifixion. But that is our time for the day. I hope you are tracking with us and you're going back. If you haven't seen our previous episodes, please go back and watch those episodes so you can follow us as we track along and as we discover the difference between the religion of Christianity and the kingdom of heaven. So until next time, Ken, which is grace, Haset, which is mercy, and Shalom, which is peace of Abba Yah, be with you.